Well, let's get back now to Pike River, and Labour's Andrew Little will be meeting with Pike River families within the next week to discuss plans for re-entering the mine. Andrew Little is in the Wellington studio with me. Good morning.
Good morning.
So what is on the agenda specifically for this meeting with the families?
It's really a chance to hear from them about their expectations, consider some of the advice, the technical advice that they've received, share some of the advice that the government has, and then start to work out what a plan looks like about trying to get manned re-entry.
OK, so the situation is that there's going to be an unmanned re-entry before the end of the year?
Well, the briefings I've had indicate that, yes, the previous government's plan was unmanned re-entry. It was based on a technology or a device that certainly hasn't been built yet and may not have been even kind of designed yet. A prototype is to be designed, and it's going to be a bit like a transformer, a bit like Optimus Prime. You drop it down a hole above the mine and it bursts into some of the other sort of creation, and it will explore the mine. It is... Look, I'm yet to see the full kind of detail of that, but the way it's been described to me is I don't even think there is a plan, actually. So the opportunity to meet with the families is an opportunity to start talking about what realistically can be done to meet their aspirations, to do everything that can be done to see whether there are any human remains left in the drift.
So are you even going ahead with this planned unmanned entry, or are you just going to sideline that and go straight for the manned one?
I'm waiting for some more advice on the specifics about what actually has been, what the instructions are to the inventor or whoever is developing it.
But if something hasn't been designed, it hasn't been built yet, it seems unlikely you're going to get in there in the next few weeks.
Exactly. Well, I don't think we'll get there in the next few weeks anyway. If we are to have successful entry, it'll be some months away. It'll be early part of next year, maybe March, April. But I do want to be very clear. I was surprised to hear that the idea about an unmanned entry is to use a prototype device that is yet to be built. That looks to me like that a pretty shaky foundation on which to give a reassurance to the family that something practical is being done to get entry to the mine.
And when you're talking about March, April, you're talking about possible manned entry at that stage?
That would be correct, yes. I mean, look, there are, as I think the leader of the opposition acknowledged, of course there are risks, and the previous government said that. The advice I've got says all the way through, says, look, actually a manned entry is technically feasible. There are risks, and it's just a question about mitigating those risks. But no one has said this is completely impossible and we should never contemplate it. It is about having a good discussion about it. And I think the most important thing right now is involving the families in that decision in a way they clearly haven't been before.
OK, but on this score, is it clear to you now that you've had these briefings, now that you are the minister in charge of this, is it clear why the national government had the concerns and wouldn't go in with a manned entry?
Their concerns were the natural concerns that anybody would have for an enterprise like this. There are risks. Of course there are going to be risks. But what the advice I've received says is that these risks are known and quantifiable, and there are ways of mitigating most of these risks. The biggest risk is the risk of rockfall, according to the advice I've received, and there are ways of mitigating that. And so I think it's about being open with the families about the advice that is there, talk to them, talk to their experts about it. The primary thing I want to make sure happens is that the families are involved in the decision making all along the way.
Sure. It comes down to health and safety law as well, though, doesn't it? So who is going to take personal responsibility for the people going into the mine if there is to be a manned entry?
Yeah, so there's look, in the end, a decision maker will be responsible. There is
Are
a
you
risk
going to be
involved.
responsible?
Look, we're working out the way that will happen now. Like Solid Energy is legally in control of the mine at the moment. They kind of disappear off the face of the earth about March next year. So we have to put in place another entity that is going to take responsibility for this type of operation and work out where legal liability lies.
Okay,
and the question will be whether the minister, myself, takes responsibility or whether you kind of give that to an independent third party.
But that's something you may take on?
Yes,
Okay.
I'll have those discussions, but my inclination is actually this is now a political matter. It requires political decision-making and political impetus. Actually, a minister should take responsibility for it.
And so you think it would be most appropriate for you to do that? You're just taking advice on whether you definitely will or not?
Yes, correct.
OK, is this something that's definitively going to happen after the end of Solid Energy? It goes into liquidation, I think, in March next year, thereabouts.
Right.
So is this going to happen just after that point?
I guess this is the sort of planning we need to do to get all the ducks in a row, get the risk assessment done for what is involved in a manned re-entry, and it will take longer, I suspect, than the time that solid energy will be in existence for. So that's why we have to prepare for an alternative to solid energy being in control of and legally liable for the mine.
So that then also means, in terms of how this new entity is set up, are you going to have to pass some kind of law to exempt this entity from health and safety law to actually mean that people can re-enter?
We will almost certainly need legislation to set up the entity. Whether we have legislation exempting that entity from the law, I mean, at the moment, in the previous Parliament, I sponsored a private member's bill that did exactly that for solid energy. But we'll have further consideration of that issue as we do the preparation and as we put the plan together.
As a member of the Labour Party, as a former unionist, how comfortable are you essentially passing some sort of amendment to get round health and safety law?
The reason why I proposed it when we were in opposition is because solid energy seems to be saying there is a risk here and therefore we're simply not going to do anything that gives rise to that risk, which I thought was unreasonable. I've been involved in plenty of risk assessment exercises and health and safety exercises where you know that there is stuff that carries risk, but you work out ways to mitigate that risk. Now, if we do all our planning and we set it up right and we get good quality risk assessment, take the advice from world-leading experts as we know are available, we may not need to do that the risk is manageable and known, and you do that.
Will you do that if you have to? If you have to do that, and that is the only way you can essentially get round this and get people back into that mine, will you do it?
I will leave that as an option available to us, yes.
And that's something you're completely comfortable with?
Yes.
Why?
Because I think in this particular instance, with this health and safety disaster such as Pike River mine tragedy was, these families were promised that everything that could possibly be done would be done. That hasn't happened yet. And yes, there are risks associated with it. And I think there is now an obligation for us as a government, having worked with those families up to now, to actually discharge that promise that was made to them.
Andrew Little, thank you very much for your time. Just approaching 8 o'clock now on Morning Report.